For 5.2a, we're going to introduce a new way to write inequalities. We did inequalities in chapter 3. It was things like this with the greater than and less than sign. But we're going to express it in a different way that will be useful when we are doing domain and range in the next section. Okay, even though you have no idea what it's going to look like yet, these are the rules or guidelines. We use square brackets for closed dots. Closed dots are the colored in ones, just like we use less than or equal or greater than or equal to. We use parentheses like that for open dots, just like we use less than or greater than to, and infinity, even though we haven't done infinity yet. Okay, we use infinity or positive infinity if the graph extends forever to the right, like this. We use negative infinity if the graph extends forever to the left. And when we write interval notation, two values are used, lowest and highest, and they are separated by a comma. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and try these. Okay, so for A, the inequality is x is greater than 5. I'm going to graph it on the number line like we did previously. This is just going to help us guide our interval notation. The critical number is 5 because it's a greater than sign with no equals. It's an open circle. And the numbers greater than 5 are to the right. Okay, now for interval notation, we go from lowest to highest. So if I follow this number line from left to right, we first start shading the number line at 5. So my lowest number is 5, comma. And then it's shaded all the way to the right, or right arrow. Since it goes forever to the right, just as this is, we represent that with infinity or positive infinity. So this graph starts at 5 and extends all the way to infinity. That's the format for interval notation. It's lowest, comma, highest. Now, we're going to use a parenthesis or bracket depending on the circles at each end. So if I start at the 5, at 5 there is an open circle. Because there's an open circle at 5, I use a parenthesis to start my interval. My graph ends at infinity. If it ends at infinity, I use a parenthesis at the infinity as well. This is what we call interval notation. It will always look something like that. So we're going to go ahead and try the next one. In inequality notation, it's x is greater or equal to negative 7. So I'm going to go ahead and put the negative 7 on my number line. Remember, the number line is just to help us, so I'm not as worried about it being as nice as we used to do it. Because it has the equal sign, it is a closed circle on negative 7, and the numbers greater than negative 7 are to the right. Okay, now for interval notation, I go from left to right, lowest to highest. The lowest part of the graph that is shaded is at the negative 7. So this graph goes from negative 7, comma, and then it's shaded all the way to the right forever and ever, which we represent as infinity. So negative 7, comma, infinity are the two values that are my minimum and maximum. Now I'm going to go back and see if they should have a parenthesis or have a square bracket. So at negative 7, there's a closed circle. Because there is a closed circle, I use the square bracket to represent at negative 7, there is a closed circle. Okay, at infinity, infinity always has a parenthesis, so I'm going to go ahead and put a parenthesis there. So this graph is shaded from negative 7 to positive infinity. At negative 7, there's a closed circle, and I indicated that with a bracket. Okay, we're going to keep going. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and graph the inequality. X is less than or equal to 3, so my critical number is 3. Because it has the equal sign, it's going to have a closed circle, and the numbers less than 3 are to the left. Okay, now I want to translate this to interval notation, so I'm going to go from the lowest shaded value to the highest. So the lowest is actually this left arrow, meaning it goes left forever. If it goes left forever, we indicate that with negative infinity, because in the negative direction it goes forever. So this is negative infinity, comma, and it's shaded all the way until I get to 3. So negative infinity is my minimum value, 3 is my highest value. Now I need to figure out parenthesis or bracket. Because it starts with negative infinity, any infinity is a parenthesis because there's no ending point to it. It goes forever. And now when I get to 3, it's a closed circle. Because it's a closed circle, I use a bracket. And that's my interval notation. Okay, let's try D. It says x is less than negative 1. Open circle because it doesn't equal the negative 1. To the left because it's the numbers lower than negative 1. Okay, now for interval notation, I want to go from lowest to highest. The lowest shaded value is this left arrow. which we represent with negative infinity because it's going forever in the negative direction. And then it's shaded until I get to -1. Okay, now I'm going to go back and figure out my parentheses and brackets to indicate my endpoints. Okay, so at negative infinity, it's always a parenthesis because infinity is always a parenthesis. At -1, there's an open circle. To show that there is an open circle, we use a parenthesis, and then that is my interval notation. Okay, for the next example, we're going to do compound inequalities using interval notation. And I'm going to sketch the graph. The graph is not my main focus, it's the interval notation. Okay, so compound inequalities just have two critical numbers. So this is saying 2 is less than x is less than 4. So 2 and 4 are my critical numbers. So I'm just going to say maybe 2 is here, 3, then 4 is here. Okay, 2 is less than x, open circle at the 2. Then it says x is less than 4, so there's an open circle at the 4. And x is between 2 and 4, so I'm going to shade the values between 2 and 4. Okay, that's my sketch for my number line. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and express this in interval notation. Okay, if I start on the lowest, I first start shading solutions at 2. So it's shaded from 2, comma, until 4. So from 2 to 4, it's shaded. Now I'm going to figure out if the endpoints are open or closed. So at 2, there's an open circle, so I will use a parenthesis. At 4, there is an open circle, so I'm going to use a parenthesis again. So it's shaded from 2 to 4, open at 2, open at 4. Okay, let me go to B, sketch my number line. There's two critical numbers, -3 and 0, so put them wherever you think. -3, -2, -1, maybe like this. You could have a different number line as long as we get the interval notation correct. Wait, -3 is less than or equal to x because it has the equals sign. It is a closed circle. And then x is less than or equal to 0, so that's also closed, and the x is between -3 and 0. Okay, now I'm going to express this in interval notation. So where do we start shading? We start shading at -3. Our solutions start at -3. And then I shaded it all the way until I got to 0. So I shaded from -3 to 0. Now at -3, there is a closed circle, so the -3 is included. To show that, I use a square bracket. Okay, -3, closed circle, shaded all the way to 0. 0 is a closed circle. To show it's a closed circle, I'm going to use the square bracket again. Okay, now let's look at C. C is also compound. 3 is less than or equal to x is less than 4, so 3 and 4 are my critical numbers. Because 3 is less than or equal to x, there is a closed circle at the 3. Because x is less than 4, there's an open circle at the 4, and the x is between 3 and 4. Okay, for interval notation, my lowest to highest value. So I started shading at 3, and I shaded until I got to 4. So I shaded from 3 to 4. At 3, there's a closed circle, and to indicate that, I will use a square bracket. At 4, there's an open circle, and to indicate that, I will use a parenthesis. Okay, let's look at D. D, -10, less than x, less than or equal to -8. So -10, -9, maybe -8. Just a sketch. Okay, -10 is less than x, so it's going to be an open circle at -10. X is less than or equal to -8, so I'm going to do a closed circle at -8. Okay, it is shaded from -10 to 8. Okay, so for my interval notation, I shaded from -10 to -8. At -10, there is an open circle. At -8, there is a closed circle. Okay, go ahead and flip it over and try the problems on the back. I will do the first two, just to remind you of what each notation is called. Okay, on the practice, it says inequality notation. Inequality notation is the old way of doing it. Interval notation is the new way of doing it. And if you forget, flip it over to the front and look for a graph that looks similar. So for inequality notation, I'm going to have an x. The critical number is at 4. And I'm shading to the right, so x is greater than 4. Okay, to translate this to interval notation, remember I'm going from lowest to highest. So I started shading at 4, comma, and then it's shaded all the way forever. So the right arrow shows me it's going to positive infinity. So 4 to infinity it's shaded because 4 has an open circle, a parenthesis. And because this is infinity, infinity is always a parenthesis. I don't even have to check. And let me go ahead and do 2 with you, and then the rest you'll do on your own, and then check your answers on the calendar. Okay, inequality notation. I'm going to use x, and the critical number is -3. It's an open circle, so no equals, and it's going to the left, so less than. And if you forget, just flip it over, find a similar graph, and then change the numbers. Okay, interval notation, I'm going from lowest to highest. So the lowest shaded it's actually shaded everywhere on the left. So this starts at -infinity, comma, and then it's shaded until I get to -3. -infinity is undefined, so it's always a parenthesis. -3, in this case, has an open circle, so I'm going to use a parenthesis. Okay, go ahead and finish the rest of the practice and then check your answers on the calendar.